Good morning to each of you. I am pleased to be here and certainly honored that it was thought not robbery that I would be able to come by today to share just a few thoughts with you. I want to congratulate the college and you as well for your partnership. See, I believe it is when practice meets the academies that we find the synergy that we need to create an evolving and ever-improving nonprofit environment. It becomes critical that we not become stagnant, not get caught up in our own little tunnels and in our silos such that we forget that there's a larger community and a greater community. And on behalf of my family, my friends, my neighbors, and all of Southern Maryland, I want to thank you for what you do, not only here at the college, but in your nonprofit agencies, because you make this a better place to live. And because you make it a better place to live, we enjoy a quality of life that is, some would say, that's second to none. And so I want to thank you for all that you do. But I also want to remind you of something. You run a nonprofit, and in the day of running around doing what you have to do, sometimes we forget that you run a business. You run an organization that is dependent upon you making critical decisions at the right time. And it's an organization that is dependent upon you offering not only your best, but seeking the best ways and the best opportunities for the organization. And sometimes when we think about what we're doing, we say, yes, we're a strong organization, but let me just say to you that if you stay where you are, as they say, the train will eventually come and it'll run over you. There's just this reality that in running a nonprofit, to maintain your strength, it's just like any muscle in your body. If you do not use it, you will lose it. And if you are going to be moving forward as a nonprofit organization, if you're going to be a strong nonprofit organization, you have got to be constantly evolving, constantly moving, constantly looking at ways that you become better and stronger. And so the S on your chest is really about how you become the super nonprofit that you want to be. How do you become and stay as strong as you'd like? Even if you consider yourself very strong right now, there's still the reality that you've got to take these things in consideration. The first thing I'd like to bring out is strategic planning, or basically the strategies. You can't ever forget the fact of who you are and the fact that you're working in a marketplace. And that marketplace is not stagnant. It is evolving every day. Your customers are changing, the demands are changing, and if we aren't paying attention to those things, we will find that we are not aligned with that marketplace. The politics in your communities change every day. The spending policies and priorities change. And being able to stay on top of those are critical strategic issues. You have to have a governance structure and an executive management team that is clearly working together on your strategic direction. I would encourage all of you to spend time on board development. It's the best time you'll ever spend for your organization. Because at the end of the day, the organization is the board is the organization. When you go to these funding sites and when you go to foundations, how many of you have gone to a foundation, the first thing they've asked you, do all your board members give? That's the first question. If you get to the room, you get inside the room, the first question they're going to ask you, who are your board members and do all of them give? At our nonprofit in DC, that's a requirement. And it's based upon your ability to give. And what we say, what our board says from their board retreat, they came away with, they're saying this, we want to be in your top 3. We realize that you have religious obligations to give. We realize that you have other obligations and other organizations you might have an affinity for. But we want to be in your top 3. And if your ability to give is $10, then that's your ability to give. But there's a reality that we'd like to be in your top 3. Clear vision and missions are critical, and a shared agenda on organizational directions. But it can't be in isolation. It can't be what you think, what you feel, or what you'd like to do. It has to be driven by market data and research. And it has to be constantly revisited, because the trends and the directions will change. And you've got to constantly be tracking social, political, and the economic climate that you're dealing with. And when you're looking at that in any strategic process, the technological climate is completely evolving and moving. You know, think about the size of your telephone and how many, your mobile phone, how many transistors are in there now? Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And how many transistors are on a chip the size of your pinky fingernail? The world is evolving and changing, and your organizations have to change to be with it. You have to realize also that you're impacted by successes, not just by your own, because you're in competition with other folks who do what you do. Their successes also impact you, because sooner or later, at one point or another, you're going to realize that if they're better than you, then you either need to improve quickly or you need to get with them as quickly as you can. I'll give you an example. I thought I knew how to run a nonprofit, and I think I still do a little bit. I spent 25 years at Southern Maryland as the executive. At a request from the national office, I was sent as a lone executive to an organization that was in crises. So they had a need to change. That's one thing about crises. You have a need to change. My third day on the job, the bank put a notice of foreclosure on $12 million worth of property. My fourth day on the job, I went to pick up the phone to call somebody, and it was dead. The phone bill hadn't been paid. I had to use my cell phone to make business phone calls. My fifth day on the job, the web designer came in and said, "We're getting a lot of hits from the FBI." I said, "Oh, well, we're having company real soon, don't worry." By the second week, they were there. The FBI, the Inspector General, and all the rest of the folks. And in the midst of all of that, as I was going through all of it, I realized we needed to get moving on some other things. All of it worked out. We were able to work it out, but what we really had to end up doing when we got through all of that foolishness was to reconstruct an organization. And we had to start off with an internal assessment of who we were and how good we were. And then we had to do something else too that we don't like to do. What do other people say about you? Everybody in here, you know, my mom passed away in December. My mom would tell the world that I was the greatest kid. And some of us treat our nonprofits like we're mothers. The greatest nonprofit in the world. We do this, we do this, we do this, we do that. But what do other people say about you? What are the objective third-party critiques? They're either valuing what you do or they have questions for you. And we can't brush those off. We've got to be willing to look at those and to share those with our board. We also have to be willing to understand something. If we are not on the cutting edge of what we do, we are entering stagnation, which is a great danger for any organization. We have to realize that even whatever resources that we have, there's this great internal competition for them. So we have to set priorities, and we have to be firm about what they are. And when the time is right, we need to shift them. What should cause us to shift them? Data, our analytics, the stuff that we measure. And we need to make sure that we're measuring the right stuff. A lot of us have old plans and old objectives, that really aren't what people are looking for. And when folks come along and tell us, oh, we need to fix so and so and so and so, we feel like we're stunned. And you're stunned because you haven't taken the opportunity to take advantage of the information you have before you. John Carter at Harvard says this: too much past success, a lack of a visible crisis, and low performance standards. See, when you get to set your own standards sometimes, everybody wants to be at 100%. And let me just tell you this. If everybody gets an A on the exam, it wasn't a test. Understand that. If everybody gets an A on the exam, it wasn't a test. It means that you set the standards too low. And sometimes when you set them too low, folk get to the point that they won't even jump to get over them. They just lay down and crawl because the bar has been set too low. And so what you have to understand is that there's this ongoing demand to push the bar just a little higher, because if you don't, you won't get there. Insufficient feedback. We don't want to know what people have to say because we're great just like we are. And all of them add up to complacency. Your strategies must be aligned with your vision and your mission. You've got to have targeted outcomes and deliverables. You've got to continually measure what you do. And the organization has to be fluid and adapt when change is needed. You need to understand that strategies are where you make that change. If you got the right goals, the right objectives, and you set the outcome bar high enough, you don't change those. You don't water that down because we didn't get there, so we need to change that because on a form we want to make sure we got 100%. You don't do that. When you do that, you send a message to every person who works for you. Don't jump. They'll bring the bar down. What you have to do is understand it's all right to have a meeting and flash up on the screen and you're at 76%. And somebody wants to give you an explanation, not an excuse, but an explanation. That's okay. In our organization, we put together a set of matrix and our analytics and such that every month, when the monthly report is done, it's done electronically through technology. Everybody's bar is measured. It's circulated. It goes posting. Our board has an intranet website. Everybody's results go on that board site every month. Quarterly, you get to come to a manager's meeting, and everybody has to present their quarterly results. And some days it's not pretty. But guess what? They get it right. They get it right because they know that we're not changing. They get it right because we don't have a problem with saying we made the wrong assumption here. We make the corrections and we move forward. Now, they also get it right because we know something else. You can't get it right if you got the wrong people. Now, that's a tough one for people to go through sometimes. But if your most valuable resource is your staff, then understand that their skills and their talents must align with your vision and your mission. And they must have the ability to carry out your strategies. They must embrace a commitment to personal and organizational growth. I know it sounds like I've been going to school forever. Let me just say I have. But I'm always intrigued in the classroom. I love to learn. I read all the time. I got books all over the place and all the rest. My wife will put me out, but not before she puts my books out, I hope. But in the midst of all of that, and yeah, no, I'm not an e-booker. I'll confess. I'm not an e-booker. I want to feel it. But in the midst of all of that, you even, regardless of what your degrees or your experiences are, you don't have a corner on the brain market. There's a new idea out there. There's another opportunity, another way of looking at what you're doing. You have to challenge yourself to do that. And the people who work with you have to challenge themselves. Now, because I have this gray hair, and it's mine, I spend most of my time teaching people who don't have it. Because I am not sticking around forever. I've planned my life so that I can do something else. So I'm constantly concerned about what the future of this organization is going to look like that I run, and I invest a lot of time in folks making sure they get there. I've got a young man right now who's at George Mason finishing his PhD, and he is smart as all out. He is analytical. He is got it. Boom, 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 boom. He's going to make somebody a great executive. I've got a young lady who's my executive vice president, who is sharp, constantly on the front lines, constantly in donors' face, constantly telling people about the organization and marketing it. And there are opportunities that I have, quite honestly, that I will not do the interview because I want the community to become knowledgeable of her, because she represents the future for the organization. And if we believe in our people and we've tested them and we've given them clearly defined roles and they respond, then we have an obligation to allow them to grow. So we spend time in training. We spend time in mentoring and coaching. And that is something we do throughout the whole organization. Right now, in a place called Edgewood, Brooklyn, in a room about 6 times the size of this, we have staff people who are going over the results from their classrooms from teaching children. And they're sitting in those classrooms in that space with a group of mentors, the people who are in there with them and in their classrooms once a week, observing what they do, have nothing to do with their supervision chain, offer no threats because they have nothing to do with their evaluations. They're there to say, how can you be a better teacher? What will make you a better teacher? How can we help you with this? Did you notice that this child was not engaged? Why didn't you get his attention? Why do we do this? Why do we spend the money to do this? Because if we've got the right people in the room to get the outcomes that we want, we have got to give them the opportunity to be successful. We owe them that much, that we want every person who works for us, who is committed to doing their job, to be able to do it to the best of their ability. And it costs, but quality costs. Something else we did, and I've noticed how the nonprofit world is growing here. We weren't good at teaching 3 to 5-year-old children. Every time I got the data back, and I was looking at it, and I kept saying, if 7 is the high, and we've got a 3 in this area, what's wrong? And, one lady made the mistake of saying to me, well, we always get a 3. And I said, well, are we always happy with it? Well, we always get a 3. You know who we're working with. And I said, well, when she left, I said, I won't be working with her much longer. And that's the reality. If that's her mindset that we can't do better, then we're not going to get better. There's no need in trying to change that. We're not going to get better. So she doesn't work with us anymore. But what we also decided was, we said, well, who does this best? Who is better than us? Let's go look at what they do. And we went to look at them. And interestingly, they had the capacity to expand. And I said, you know what? We get high marks on delivering the human and social services. You get high marks on delivering the academic services. Why don't you deliver the academic services for us? And we'll do the human services for you. And together, the families will get the best of both worlds. We formed a partnership with a group that started in Massachusetts called Apple Tree Institute. If you check the charter school movement in DC, Apple Tree is the #1 performing charter school for children ages 3 to 5. They teach our kids who are 3 to 5 years old now, because our kids deserve #1, not also ran. And part of this thing is that you have to understand what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and form the alliances and partnerships. Now, their classrooms that they run with me don't look like what they do, because they have to take in consideration what I require of them. So, you know, Nancy Grassmick used to say all the time, collaboration is an unnatural act. Because you leave there when it's truly collaboration. You don't look like you anymore, and they don't look like themselves anymore. This is this new union. And so we do those types of things because we are looking for partners that make a difference, and make a difference indeed. We do partnerships in our technology programs. We run a young adult technology program that places folks with IT certifications with defense contractors. The average starting salary is $42,000 with a high school diploma and 6 months in our classrooms. Why? We went out and hired the best and formed a partnership with the best private sector trainer we could find. And so part of what I'm saying to you is this. One of the things that not only are you, if you don't have the skill set, you need to go out and get the skill set, either through collaboration or partnerships. And you also got to remember something else here. You know, Collins says it in his book, From Good to Great, you got to first get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. And then they'll figure out where you're going. But if you don't do that, you're going to constantly be a weak organization. And the real sales challenge is this. You've got to have the right people for the right life cycle of your organization. Every organization has a life cycle. But you've got to realize what that life cycle is, and the right people need to be on the team. And let me just say to you, as the life cycle changes, you're going to have to change people as well. You know, one of the real challenges that you have, and Collins brings this out too, and is that we build bureaucratic rules and structures to manage the small percentage of wrong people on the bus. And those people who are the wrong people on the bus, they drive away the right people. Therefore, the percentage of the wrong people on the bus increases because the right people have gone. Which means you then need to build more bureaucracy because you've got a larger percentage of wrong people. You should come to my organization and try to order a paperclip. We are blowing up, that's our final vestige. We're blowing it up, the financial procedure process. If you've ever been through an organization that has had to end up under review by the FBI and all the rest of that, you will realize that to get them out of your building, you need to have procedures to get a paperclip about like that. But part of that process had to do with the fact that they had the wrong people on the bus. And so I'm pleased now. I've been there for 10 years. I fixed their 2 ugly audits, and now I've had 9 audits that are without finding or question cause. I think I can, now that I've got all the wrong people off the bus, we can get our paper clips sooner. But in the midst of all of that, understand this is a chart that's actually out of a book done for nonprofits, and it basically talks about organizational life cycles. As an organization begins to grow, when you start off, you grow, and it's just like an adolescent. But you reach a point of maturity, and if you stay stagnant, you see that the curve starts to decline. That's the danger with an organization. You have to be willing to understand that you need to renew that dotted line, make it all over again. And in renewing it, that's part of what I'm doing right now. When I talked about my young people who we've got in school and doing other things, why? Because I got gray hair. The other thing I want to talk to you about is systems. Organizational capacity is a must. It costs, and cheaper is not better. One of the myths in contracting with nonprofits has always been, well, they can do it cheaper. Well, yeah, sure they can do it cheaper. If their people don't have health coverage, they can do it cheaper. If they don't have retirement, they can do it cheaper. If they don't get raises, they can do it cheaper. If they're in inadequate and dysfunctional facilities, they can do it cheaper. And as a matter of fact, you're going to get just what you paid for. Because ultimately, you will suck the life out of every person who walked through the door, and you will get a lifeless outcome. And so ultimately, you got to realize that you need human resource systems that train and develop people and their capacities. You need financial systems that do more than accounting. I have got 4 CPAs who work for me. I have accounting like you would not believe. I have to wrestle for financial management. There's a difference. There is a clear difference. Financial management integrates your outcomes with the cost of delivering the product. Financial management does charting and projecting a little differently and measures what it costs for good outcomes. Financial management is concerned about return on the investment. And so a lot of times we confuse terms, but you need systems that allow you to produce some financial management. Program performance has to be measured. And quite honestly, if you aren't doing quality control, look out. Strong nonprofits are data-driven. Systems must be designed to share data. And I know the government has stovepiped you to death. Only use this software to do this. Only use this database to do this. If you can't come up with a system to integrate it, you're going to have to do it manually, but trust me, you cannot truly determine how effectively you've been. Customers, to respond to customers, you've got to deal with multiple data points. And if you're dealing with multiple data points, you've got to be able to analyze the impact of one against the other. And so systems are critical. Developing them are critical. Design your system that responds to your need. And that's critical. Ricky Harding will tell you that, I don't know, he might have been too young to remember me being in trouble. I was in Southern Maryland, and they told me I had to use a state system that would put all of these energy assistance checks in a system that was sent off to someplace, God knows where, and they would send us a report, and then I could write a check. And I said, well, that's fine, except for when the lady comes in here with an axe because she's freezing to death, and we can't cut her check, who's going to answer the question? They said, you have to use this system. And I said, no, the contract doesn't say that. The contract says I have to deliver this product. We brought in some folks to design our own system. We were considered renegades. You know, it's fine. I'm from Southern Maryland. You expect me to be normal? And so in the process of all of that, we went through this process of designing our own system. We put the system in place. February came and there were snowstorms one after the other, and our customers had heat. The Baltimore Sun was carrying articles about people on energy assistance in Baltimore and Anne Arundel County not getting their help. Baltimore City, people's lights were being turned off. Although the state was setting on $30 million, people couldn't get it because they couldn't get it through the system. All of a sudden, all the chatter about those delinquent people at Southern Maryland went away. And in April, they came to us and said, can we buy your system? And so the young men who designed the system for us, who were Cornell engineering graduates, actually got the contract with the state to design the state system. But your system has to work for you. It can't be what somebody tells you you need. It has to work for you. And so when you design your systems, understand what you're dealing with, and also realize that systems have life cycles as well. Because as things change, they will have to change, and you're going to have to invest in them. The other thing is that you also got to make sure that you constantly test your comfort level. In the nonprofit world, programs and organizational capacity almost seem as competitors in a zero-sum struggle for limited resources. How many of you have this debate? Do we spend the money on administration, quote, administration, or we spend the money on program service delivery? Yeah, all of us have that debate, but I have news for you. If you don't have sufficient capacity administratively, ultimately your programs will suffer and the organization will suffer. And you have to bite the bullet. One of the best ways of doing that is getting an indirect cost proposal approved by a cognizant agency, and understand that now with the new OMB standards, states and localities don't have an option about setting a ceiling on your administrative overhead or indirect costs. Starting October 1, they must pay the approved rate. So if you've got an indirect cost proposal, you've got a bargaining chip, and you need to use it. We just recently went through a struggle with a weatherization contract with the DC government, and we rejected it. We rejected it because they didn't pay the right indirect cost rate. So they came back and they offered us the right indirect cost rate, and then they wanted to change it again. So we said, look, we're not going through this. Let's go to the feds. As life would have it, they found out, yes, they were wrong, so they have to correct it. But the point is that you have to understand that organizational capacity has to be fought for. You can't shortchange your administrative overhead. If you do, you're going to ultimately pay the price. You're going to get what you pay for. And nobody wants to be in, what did you call it, the county times? So let me just say this. Because of time, I decided not to deal with this directly, but there are 5 things you need to be focused on to keep that S on your chest. Your strategy, your staff, your systems I've talked about. But in all of those, make sure that you keep seeking, staying on the edge, innovating. And also make sure that you're securing. In other words, securing your sustainability, but your accountability is also a critical piece of that. And so, as you work through this conference and spend your time focusing on how you develop your organization, be mindful that it requires constant work on strategy. Don't think that you married your staff. You made a commitment. It is a mutual commitment. And when the business changes, or when the business must change, you've got to come to the realization that you have to make change. In about 1986, I won the national office for the National Association of Community Action Agencies. That was, and still is, the national organization of professionals who are community action agency leaders. And I got to travel across the country. I'm going to end with this story. Community action had been founded in the early 60s. And what I found place after place, particularly the places that were having trouble, was that people had retired in place. Do you understand what I'm saying? They had retired in place. They got up and they came to work every morning. But they had been in these nonprofit organizations that had prided themselves on being able to do it cheap. So they had no retirement plan. They had no exit strategy. And they had basically created an internal commitment to each other that we just exist. Services were horrible. I got a call and asked, would you go down and evaluate an agency in Richmond? There were literally children sitting in classrooms, Head Start classrooms, with pigeon stuff dropping down on the tables that they were eating on. People quit. They had retired in place. And they forgot who they were and who they were supposed to be serving. You've got to have means of renewing yourself. You've got to be willing to understand. And something else was happening to those people. Technology was becoming more and more present. And one of my friends just celebrated her 80th birthday the other day. And she reminds me all the time, Dana, I'm an immigrant to technology. I worked a whole lifestyle, a whole career in America before I had to touch a personal computer. And she says, I'm an immigrant. Face it. The PC is new to me. And so she just got into it, and she has that thing singing now. But the reality is that there were a lot of people who did not use technology. When I went to UPO, they were shocked that I used email. They never had a director that used email. 2004. Okay? So realize that we have to reinvigorate ourselves, renew ourselves if we are going to be striving and stronger, and always keep the S on your chest. Thank you.